Welcome to Search for Signs. My name is Gary Willing. If this information interests you, please press the like and subscribe button and press the bell for notifications. You know, over the course of these videos, I've been talking a lot about the recent events and the recent history of the Masters and how it relates to all of us. Now, I'm going to go back a little bit farther, like a lot farther, and talk about Atlantis. Now, I'm not talking about it in a way that is kind of like so far away that it doesn't affect us, because I think there are things that happened many, many millennia ago that are still influencing the events of today, and at least the mindset of the people of today, which is just as important as the events, because the people create the events, right? Now, most of us have heard about Atlantis. We might not know much about it, or what we've heard about it might be a bunch of garbage. I have no idea. It just depends on what you think, you know. I tend to, like I say, believe and trust the information that's coming from Alice Bailey or Benjamin Creme or even Helena Blavatsky. I find Helena Blavatsky's writings to be rather deep, and I don't follow them quite as well, but it is what, that's just me. You might find it very interesting read. But according to the esoteric teachings, there was a continent called Atlantis that existed for millions of years, but it ended quite abruptly a little over 100,000 years ago. Now, you might be thinking, well, it's so far in the past, what does it have to do with me today? Well, it actually is still affecting us today. Now, what do I mean by that? Now, sifting through all the folklore and all the distortions about, you know, Atlantis, the continent of the people that lived on that continent were very similar to the people of today, because we are actually reincarnations of those people, of that civilization. And what happened was that civilization existed, and the people of the time knew who the masters were. The masters were out openly for who they were, taught humanity as much as they could, because the evolutionary level of all of us at that time was pretty low. In fact, from the master's point of view, we weren't thinking much above the level of an animal, you know, to some degree. We were human, but we weren't really even to the level we're at today, you know. So we didn't think for ourselves, you know, like that, and, you know, that kind of thing. Now, at some point during the Atlantean period, humanity started to learn about how to gain access, or how to use their emotional astral vehicle. Okay, and we'll talk more about the different vehicles of a human body, but basically the emotions, which is why the pyramids were built, because that pyramid shape actually helps to channel emotional energy. So it made it easier for the people of that time to use emotional energy, because as easy as it is for us today to use our emotions, and you can see it everywhere you go, right? There was a time when we were working toward that. Like, that was actually kind of like the next step for humanity. And the problem was, and this is the reason why I think it relates very strongly to today, is the emotions and the astral desire nature of all of us is the strongest part of who we are. In fact, when we say that we're thinking for ourselves, we're usually just emoting for ourselves. We don't really have the capability of thinking in the way that esoterically, the way that it truly is. Now, during the time that the emotion started and the astral desire started to come into play, just like it's affecting us today, the materialism of that culture started to really not only flourish, but just took over. And most of the people at the time became very materialistic. Now, humanity as a whole was being used up, you know, toward the latter part of the Atlantean period, was being used equally by, and were influenced, not used, but were influenced by the forces of light, which is Maitreya and the Masters that I'm talking about now. Now, the Masters that back then might have been different, but the hierarchy is the same, right? That group of Masters that made up the Masters at the time were influencing humanity. So it was almost 50-50. 50% of the people at the time were open to their suggestions and their advice, and then the other 50 were being used quite in the same way, but differently, by the forces of darkness. Yes, there are masters of darkness, just like there are masters of light. Now, I don't want to go into it too much because I don't want to go off that. I want to go down that road. But as Maitreya himself said, all in life is energy, and that energy has its opposites. Well, just because there's masters of light, there's also masters of darkness. Their job is a lot different than the forces of light. They actually have a purpose on this planet, but where it becomes a problem is they tend to, their work should be just limited to keeping the planet's physical nature together. But what they do is they sidestep it, and they kind of, cross lanes, so to speak. They should stay in that lane, and they go into another lane, which is trying to keep us from evolving. And that's what creates the evil in the world. Now, it's a lot deeper than that, but that's a simplification of it. Now, what happened in Atlantis was humanity was being used equally by both the forces of light and the forces of darkness. And there was a great war that was culminated by the total destruction of that continent. And it was depicted in the Bible as the flood. Noah was a master at that time. Thus his age was, several hundred years and so forth like this. But he was warning the people that this was going to happen. Some of them, of course, listened. Some of them didn't. And the imagery in the Bible is that of the flood. And so esoterically, if you're an esotericist and you read in the Bible about Noah and the flood, it makes a whole lot of sense. Like, oh, that makes total sense. Now, if you're a fundamentalist Christian and you're reading the Old Testament and you read about the flood and somebody tells you that it's about the Atlantean continent being destroyed and Noah was a master, well, of course it's going to be total garbage to you, right? But esoterically, that's what happened. Now, whether you believe it or not, that's up to you. I'm just kind of sharing my side of the story of it. Now, what does that relate to today? Well, ever since then, the masters have been hidden away in the remote regions of the world, the mountains, the Himalayas, the desert regions of the world, the Gobi Desert, the Sahara, and all that kind of stuff. And they've awaited the time that they would come back into the world known for who they were. And that time is actually now. Now, prior to now, that great war that was going on and raging on in Atlantean times toward the end resurfaced during World War I and World War II, which, if you know anything about the history of Europe and the world, it was pretty dramatic. You could see the forces of light, fighting the forces of darkness. The Axis powers were being used by the forces of darkness, and the forces of light were being influenced and helped by the forces of light, by the masters. And esoterically, the Antichrist is an energy. It's not a person. And it worked through the Axis powers, especially the Nazis in Germany. And it's a very destructive force, but it has a purpose in and of itself. And the purpose, whether we like it or not, it's not very comforting to think of, but it destroys the old ways of thinking and relating to allow a new way of thinking and relating. So it's a destructive force, but it has a purpose. And so people, of course, especially fundamentalists, misread and misunderstand their own scriptures by thinking it's a person that's going to come out and deceive everybody. But if you look at the qualities of Hitler, he sure did fit the qualities that even the fundamentalists think about who the Antichrist was. He fooled a lot of people. Even some people in America thought he was the greatest thing since, Hitler. I'm just kidding. The greatest thing since sliced bread. But he was doing all this nefarious stuff, obviously, right, that we know about now. But they didn't know about it. But they were fooled by him, right? And then he tried to take over the world, right? Of course. And the Allied nations had to step up to stop him. Because if they hadn't stepped up, he would have taken over the world. And so, but yet, today, most people, because they don't understand their own scriptures, are still looking very hard on the internet, looking on YouTube, trying to, guessing who they think the Antichrist is or will be or whatever like this. And little do they know they're wasting their time. It's a total waste of time, because all they have to do is just read history and European history to know who the Antichrist was. But, that's for them to find out on their own time. But esoterically, that's what happened. So the time of Atlantis really is, in some way, is still shaping the times that we live in today. And so the masters were waiting for so long for humanity to be ready for them to come back into the world, which is what's happening today. So when I put up these videos and I say that the reappearance of the Christ is not a single event, it's been going on for thousands and thousands of years, all the groundwork that's been laid for the last 100,000 years by all the disciples in the world, from anyone from Moses to Enoch to Jesus himself to the Buddha to Abraham Lincoln, or all the Renaissance painters, or Mozart or whatever, right? Even Einstein and Martin Luther King, and I mean, just anybody you can think of in history that's helped to change history in a way, right, has knowingly or unknowingly helped to bring about the reappearance again of the Christ and the Masters of Wisdom. And that's what we're seeing today. So when Benjamin Creme came out and said that Maitreya was coming back out into the world along with this group of masters, it also it brought about he predicted, and it also brought about these miraculous signs that we've talked about: the healing waters, the crosses of light, angel sightings, and then even brought about the work of the Space Brothers. So it's a huge, huge event that's going on today. It's just fantastic how massive it is. But yet people are totally unaware of what's going on, which is the Christ style from the get-go. He's always been like that. He's always come in very quiet, like he said, like a thief in the night in an hour when you least expect it. That's just the way he's always done things. And he even fulfilled the own prophecy that we put out there, that the Christ would come back in the clouds, right? Well, he could have thought himself from Pakistan to London in an instant, but yet he had to ride in a plane and the bumpy plane, and have to deal with all the. I wonder if he sat in the middle seat, the window seat, or the aisle seat. I've always wondered that. But anyway, but he did that in order to fulfill the prophecy that he would come back through the clouds. But he didn't do it in a way that the Christians, of course, are expecting, right? And then, in the future, the very near future, when he finally comes out and declares himself openly to the world, rather than we're all seeing it in the sky, it's going to be on our television sets. But everyone from, the southern part of the southern hemisphere to the northern, eastern hemisphere, the western hemisphere, we're all going to see him on TV. All eyes will see him, will be fulfilled on that. But it all started, really, when the continent of Atlantis was destroyed, and it's affected us ever since, and it's brought us to this very, very low point that we're at today. But Maitreya, when we see him on TV on the day of declaration, he's going to point out how low we've fallen, of course. He's going to show us the next way forward, which is sharing the world's resources to bring about justice. But he's also going to show us where we can go if we just work together to bring about that peace and that justice, the future that we have. He's going to show us in our own mind. He's going to show us what that's going to look like. There's no one else on the planet that could do this. Only the Christ himself could do this. You'll see. You might not believe me now, but, you'll see what I'm talking about. But and as always, take action. Help SOP save our planet. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again in future videos. Have a great day.